Live on tape, Work in Progress, a World at Work podcast about work, life, and everything in between. With award-winning radio host Tom Alexander and WorkSpan's Not Safe for Work columnist Charles Epstein. Here are your hosts, Tom and Charles.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Work in Progress. My name is Tom Alexander, and of course, it is Charles Epstein, my partner on the other side. What's going on, Charles?
Hey, Tom. How you doing?
Doing well. You know, just thinking the other day I came across an article about the new definition of business success. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, since the old definition is based on profits and profitability, I'm assuming the new definition is based on what? Twitter followers?
Yes. Yes. And your likes. It's a new science, you know. I assume, kidding aside, the new definition is about things like, you know, company culture. Is it a good place to work? Does it reward, encourage innovation, risk taking? And if that's part of it, how is it measured? You know, just an aside, I read an article that came out during Davos a little while back that said, you know, AI and machine learning were on the minds of just about every CEO there. But, you know, here's the thing. While you know, many of these CEOs publicly talk about AI as a friendly, hyper-efficient helper and coworker, you know, in their quiet rooms, they're all talking about, shockingly, you know, how it could be used to pare down overhead, be more efficient, and of course, be profitable. So I guess the new way, same as the old way.
Yeah, a company culture, which is something we've talked about with everyone from the actor, of course, Phil Morris, to Google's CMO, it's John Zizimos. Obviously, an increasingly important component that goes into success of a business or, in Phil's case, a hit TV show.
Yeah. You know, as everybody's going to be competing for top talent and everybody wants to be a great place to work and attract these people and develop them and, you know, so forth. You know, here's another thought, you know, that people might want to factor into the definition of business success. The Israeli writer, Yuval Noah Harari, I think I have that right. Many know him from his book, Sapiens, which is brilliant. I recently came out with 21 lessons for the 21st century. And in it, you know, among the many interesting provocative things he says is, if you want to arrest climate change, we're going to have to arrest business growth. So, you know, the more businesses grow, or, you know, as long as there are incentives or penalties regarding business growth, the more carbon we're going to be putting into the atmosphere. So perhaps at some point in the not too distant future, business success will be to some degree based on, you know, the size of your carbon footprint.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out at the workplace. Maybe rewards are given to people who replace plastic with paper straws, which, by the way, I just used yesterday.
Okay.
I'm doing my part.
Good.
Or guys who manfully refuse to use aerosol underarm deodorant after a vigorous workout in the company gym, no less.
Somehow I don't see how that promotes a very positive company culture, particularly if you're looking to attract good people. That might be a little bit of a disincentive. I don't know about you, Tom. It certainly would promote a more, how would you say, authentic workplace. You know, speaking of Harari, I also came across this, a little bit of a departure, but it kind of goes to this in a weird way. It wasn't so much about redefining business per se, really thoughts about our education system, which could probably also use some redefining. Check this out, you know, if you'll indulge me for a second.
Sure.
Here it is. The Industrial Revolution has bequeathed us the production line theory of education. In the middle of town, there is a large concrete building divided into many identical rooms, each room equipped with rows of desks and chairs. At the sound of a bell, you go to one of these rooms together with 30 other kids who are all born the same year as you. Every hour, some grown-up walks in and starts talking. They're all paid to do so by the government. One of them tells you about the shape of the earth. Another tells you about the human past, and a third tells you about the human body. It is easy to laugh at this model, and almost everybody agrees that no matter its past achievements, it is now bankrupt. But so far, we haven't created a viable alternative. Interesting.
Very interesting. And you're right. Sort of a Martian's view of education, which is what we might need for the redefinition of business success, a completely different perspective, kind of like life hacking, right?
Yes. You know, you've heard of the 30,000 foot big picture thing. Now I guess we got the 240 million mile perspective.
Yeah.
That's some perspective.
It is some perspective. You need, CinemaScope or wide glasses. It would be great if in the process they'd redefine the line between B and A.
Yes, and retroactively reply it to our report cards. That's an excellent idea.
Yes. Yeah, I could use some retroactive report cards. That would definitely, in my favor, of course. I could retroactively claim my degree from MIT.
Good thinking.
Yeah. Anyway, in today's podcast, we'll be speaking with Ron Selowach, founder and CEO of HRMC, pioneers in applying AI to candidate interviews. And that should definitely be fascinating. Our second interview will be with a legendary sports radio jock and now political opiner. Can I say that?
Well, you just did.
Sid Rosenberg.
And he's saying it every single day, God help us.
Yes, who will talk to us about, whatever comes into his very active mind at the time. It is Sid Rosenberg. Seriously, one of the things we'll be talking to Sid about is how he manages to juggle his work and his family, and how he managed the ups and downs of his various addictions to drugs and gambling in particular. So Sid Rosenberg joining us as well. The Work in Progress podcast moves on.
This is your once-a-year opportunity to help put your organization at the forefront of all things total rewards. It's not just the exceptional speakers, or the inspiring content, or the invaluable networking. It's 3 days, jam-packed with what's now and new in HR and what's on the horizon. Register today for the 2019 Total Rewards Conference and Exhibition, May 6th through the 8th in Orlando, Florida. Register today and see you in Orlando.
We come on this loop, John B., my grandfather and me.
Joining us is Ron Selowach, CEO of HRMC, or Human Resource Management Center, a company he founded 35 years ago that uses artificial intelligence to virtually interview job candidates. The company's signature candidate assessment platform, HRMC Acclaim, has virtually interviewed over 55 million job applicants since its inception. Ron is joining us today from lovely Tampa, Florida. Thanks for being with us, Ron.
Good morning, Tom. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, and please say hello to my partner, Charles Epstein.
Hey, Charles.
Hey, Ron. Yeah, I just got to say, I've known Ron for over 15 years. And, full disclosure, I've done some consulting over the years. But more importantly, I'm privileged to be able to call Ron a friend. I hope the feeling's mutual, Ron. If not, I've just embarrassed myself before a global audience. Thank you very much.
No, you didn't embarrass yourself at all. I feel very much the same way.
Okay, great. Before we begin, one thing many people in the industry don't know about Ron is that he is a thrill seeker. Would you agree, Ron, or am I mischaracterizing that?
Well, I don't. It's much more serious than just thrill seeking. But yeah, I've always had a love of speed and the water.
Ron actually races boats for fun and some profit, owns a company that manufactures engines for boat racing. I believe it's racingoutboard.com, Ron?
Yeah, racingoutboards.com.
Oh, outboards.com, thanks. HR and thrill seeking don't necessarily go hand in glove. Maybe, Ron, you could explain how you came to this passion and whether we need to be concerned for your health.
Well, I try to make a long story short. I grew up on a farm that had a half mile of lakefront on one of the lakes up in the Finger Lakes, upstate New York. And I'd be out in the fields working, and I'd look down at the lake, and I'd see all those rich kids having fun with their hydroplanes and all that kind of thing back in the 1950s. And, I'm not the type of person to begrudge somebody else a good fortune, but I said someday I'll get to do that. Mm-hmm. And pretty much forgot about it. I became a single parent with sole custody of my 3 kids, and so I had to put all that aside. I used to race cars as well, and I had to put all that aside. Through the years, I became somewhat successful and was always looking for ways to give back. And for 17 years, I served as a volunteer chairman of the Private Industry Council, which later morphed into the workforce boards. And as one way of giving back, but I wasn't satisfied with that. I didn't see the results that I was looking for. I heard about a antique outboard international meet in Cypress Gardens back around 2000, and I thought, oh, I remember those. Forgot all about them. So I went to it, and I caught the bug. In the next year and a half, I bought 150 motors and 30 boats.
Oh, my goodness.
And it kind of got out of hand. But anyway, I then learned about a race that was going to be somewhat near me. So I went to it, not knowing anyone. And I figured, well, I won't be able to go into the pits like auto racing or anything like that, but I'll get to watch a little bit. Maybe I'd like to try it. When I went there, first thing I saw was families, kids, adults, everybody, all having a good time, interacting with each other. And I was able to go into the pits. There was no forbidden area or anything. And I started talking to people, and they started talking to me, and they welcomed me, which I found rare. That doesn't happen in auto racing. I was walking around talking to everybody, getting informed, and I noticed this one kid on the shore, and he was just throwing rocks in the water. And I figured, well, his equipment probably broke down. But I went up and talked to him, and I said, how's it going? He says, well, I can't race. I said, wait, your equipment break down? He says, no, I got bad grades this week and my parents won't let me race. I like that. And the more I learned about it, the next morning, I got up and families were intense and whatnot, and they were cooking bacon and eggs, and boy, did that smell good on that morning. But everybody had chores, everybody had things to do. And I saw that the women and the girls were just as competitive racing as the guys were, which was important to me because my youngest daughter, I'd try to race her that way, that anything she wanted to do, she could do. But then I found that the sport was dying because neither Mercury nor OMC were making racing engines anymore to support the sport. And it's such a great sport for teaching our young people competition, working for what you earn, good character, sportsmanship, all that brought families together. And I thought, oh, this is what I'm really looking for. And I found out that the sport was dying because nobody was making motors anymore. I discovered that there was a company that was all but derelict that used to make motors. And I bought that company just to have the company, if you will. But we redesigned the motors. So I bought that company. We resurrected it, started manufacturing again, and are now providing motors again to help build the sport back up again. Because I was interested not in the competition on the water. I was interested in what it would do for families and young people.
Yeah, it's interesting the way you describe it. It sort of combines your passion and a set of principles, which sort of brings me. You mentioned you grew up in a farm in upstate New York. I know over the years we've talked about things like the dignity of work. We've had many variations of that conversation. How did that, and to some extent, the experience you're talking about here, how do those experiences inform your views on work?
Oh, they very definitely did. When you grow up on a farm, from the time you're little, you see that when there's work to be done, that comes before all else, always. Your life is kind of controlled by nature. Dignity and respect are earned by how much you can get done, how many acres you can plow in a day, how much hay you can bale. Everything is based on hard work. And that work ethic is ingrained in you, and you carry that with you throughout life, whether you're on the farm or in business or even recreation. I really appreciate my time, my younger years, and what it did for me. And everybody else, it was a farming community, so everybody else was pretty much the same. Nobody had too much, but we didn't realize that because everybody was in the same situation.
Sure.
And it taught you respect for the individual based on what they were able to do.
Ron, you're a true pioneer in applying artificial intelligence processes to talent selection. First, can you describe how your platform, HRMC Acclaim, works in using machine-based logic in vetting potential candidates?
Yeah, we've been using artificial intelligence since 1993, long before the internet became a thing. In the early days, we used IVR technology and faxing for delivering content both to the candidates and to the employer. Now we use the internet mostly, but sometimes we can still combine the two technologies. We use artificial intelligence differently than most applications. We blend industrial and organization psychology best practices with artificial intelligence. We use it for intelligent process automation. Talent acquisition is a process. It includes gathering information, giving out information, making decisions, all that sort of thing. And the best way to do that, when you want to know if somebody can perform a job, the best thing to do is ask them, what can you do? And let them explain to you. Well, you can't do that when you have thousands of applicants for any given job or anything like that. But with artificial intelligence, you can. So we developed a process that's extremely flexible platform. It will automate everything from the candidate's first expression of interest in a job all the way through to scheduling them for a mutually convenient, the most promising, to come on site for a mutually convenient time for a final face-to-face interview. Everything in between, including that initial interview, is all done by artificial intelligence. And it makes all this decisioning, all that sort of thing that's necessary in that process up to the final interview. That's the most important thing. That's where the human element is most valuable.
Related to that, you recently published an article in WorkSpan on nonlinear hiring. Can you briefly share with our listeners what you wrote about and why this has become something of a new phenomenon in today's workplace? I mean, you may have already sort of touched on that, but if you could tell us a little bit more about the article.
I guess you could attribute it to what they call the gig economy these days, and a different approach to work among millennials and even younger folks. A lot of them, they expect to be in 6 or 7 different industries in their working life. A lot of them, the gig economy, they work part-time or they work temporary, and that's the way they want it. It makes it very hard for HR. HR has always been, they use the resume and the work history to make assumptions about whether what they did in the past would prepare them for the job that they have at hand to fill. With the gig economy and part-time and temporary work becoming more and more prevalent, even if it's full-time, they expect to have, 5 or 6, 7, 8 different jobs in different industries and whatnot. What they did in the past and their progression, if you will, to make assumptions about whether they can perform successfully the job at hand that they're being considered for. The problem with today's workforce is that there's no linear progression anymore. Not with a lot of candidates. With some candidates it still is, but there's not a linear progression anymore. So it makes it difficult for them to make assumptions about, well, he worked for that company in the past, so he could probably do what we need to do, or well, he did this for that company, so maybe she can do our job. They would use past experience as an indicator of future performance, but it's not reliable anymore, especially when there's no linear progression to judge their progression in their career. We took a different approach. We said, well, like I said earlier, the best way to evaluate somebody is to ask them questions. Can they do the job? Are they going to fit into our culture? Will they find this job motivating? Ask them questions about that, let them answer, and then evaluate what they have to say. And that became the basis for our system.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it seems to me a perfect application of artificial intelligence, which, among other things, is about pattern recognition. So you could take a look at somebody over the course of like 7, 10, 15 years. And even if that person has changed jobs multiple times, just by asking the right questions and by sort of identifying certain patterns, you can glean whether, in fact, this person has the skills, the culture fit for that particular job, where maybe to the uninitiated or without that technology, you look at this and there just doesn't seem to be any, as the great man once said, no theme to this pudding. Now you can now you can sort of crystallize that, which brings me to I guess a bigger question. Everybody's asking this, and in fact, just before we came on to do this morning, I saw an article. I think it was in Market Watch talking about they're projecting in I don't know how many years it is. I need to go back, but maybe 10 years, 15 years, that to 30 million people are going to be displaced. They're going to be out of work and perhaps unemployable. That's obviously, the other side of AI. So I guess the question I want to ask is, where do you see AI heading in the coming years? First, how do you think it will improve talent selection? And then, maybe you could share some thoughts on its impact on the future of work.
So far, I think AI in talent acquisition has been used mostly to read through resumes in search of the best suited prospects. The problem with that is that the source document, the resume, we all know the shortcomings of the resume. It's self-promotion. You don't know whether the information is reliable or not. All the problems with the resume. Yet it amazes me how many different ways have been tried to make them work. But any solution that uses the resume dooms itself to the same shortcomings as the source document itself. I think in the coming years, the resume will still play a role as anecdotal confirmation or forensic evidence of past performance. But the AI-powered interview will become the primary focus for talent acquisition. I don't see artificial intelligence putting a lot of people out of work. I see it changing them to be more analytical and to be more strategic and get to those activities and projects and so forth where they can really make a contribution.
Our guest has been Ron Selowach. He's the CEO of HRMC, that's Human Resource Management Center. And he spoke to us today from his home in Tampa, Florida. And Ron, we really appreciate your time. And it was a very interesting conversation.
I've enjoyed it as well. And you asked some really good questions.
And we'll be back after these words.
As the demand for ever more talent increases, the issues of equity become top-level concerns for organizations. Comp teams are creating new playbooks to meet the challenge. For a growing number of organizations, those playbooks include job-based ranges that historically have been too burdensome to implement and maintain. Learn the trends driving adoption and how you can leverage them to attract and retain critical talent in PayScale's latest research. Visit us at payscale.com. That's payscale.com.
Yeah, I said it, we are. You can call me Caesar. In a dark Caesar. Please follow the leader.
Our guest is one of the most popular radio hosts in the number one market in the United States at WABC in New York. Sid Rosenberg, no stranger to controversy, both in front of and off mic. But his direct, honest, and often hilarious and thoughtful style is undeniably entertaining, which is why he remains a trailblazer in talk radio. From sports to entertainment to politics and beyond. Excited to have him join us today on Work in Progress. Sid Rosenberg, welcome.
I swear to God, at this point, after that introduction, give me one Parliament cigarette and about a 15-minute nap, and I'm good to go. Tommy and Charles, how are you, boys? How's everything down there?
Sid, that's a hell of a start. But I've got to jump right to it. We're both Mets fans, and fabled Mets maven that you are. Is there hope, Sid?
In terms of the Mets, I'm going to tell you something, Charles, that's going to make you happy. And I'm one of those fans that usually expects the worst. I'm one of those annoying New York fans that even when things are good, and they haven't been good up here for most of our teams for many years outside the Yankees, I always say it's going to be bad. I'm telling you the Mets are going to be really good. Now, look, it's all about the pitching. They got to stay healthy. But if you get at least 60 starts out of Jacob deGrom and Noah Syndergaard, Wheeler is back. He won the comeback player of the year last year. This kid, Steven Mott, as a fourth starter, is pretty good. The bullpen, Familia now as the setup guy. They bring him back. They get Edwin Diaz, who led the majors, 57 saves with the Mariners last year. So the Met pitching probably is the best in baseball. Now, offensively, they got to score some runs. I think Robbie Cano's got 2 good years left. That's good news. You got some good young players on that team. And then, hopefully Cespedes gives them 100, 110 games, maybe. I like Ramos behind the plate. So what I'm telling you is inside a very tough division. The Braves won it last year. They'll be good again. Certainly, I talked about the Mets just now. You look at a team like the Phillies. The Phillies scare me because they're solid. And of course, Washington comes back with their top 3 starters. They've added now Corbin from Arizona. So they've got Strasburg, Scherzer, and Corbin. So it's a very competitive division. Could be 4 very, very good baseball teams. But on paper, which means nothing, the Mets are the best team in the NL East.
Well, listen, we asked you to prognosticate. Now we're going to go back into the Wayback Machine a little bit, Sid. And,
you and I had the good fortune to work together. Well, it was good fortune for me. I don't know if the opposite is true, but for 3 years on a show that really blazed trails of its own. It was called The Drive, and we fused comedy with sports, entertainment, and without much radio experience at the time, when you stepped in, you're suddenly thrust into the spotlight of a nationally syndicated show. What was that adjustment like for you personally and professionally?
It was easy because I had no idea what the hell I was doing. I mean, I really had no idea what I was doing. I mean, guys, you know this, Tommy and Charles, too. I was working customer service at Sportsline USA, which is now CBS.com, and was the first of its kind. Before there was an ESPN, a Fox Sports, a Yahoo, there was Sportsline USA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I was working customer service, making $7 an hour, breaking my ass. And when they asked me to do some radio, I said, yeah, I'll do it. Why not? I'll try it if I can make some more money. They gave me $1 raise, Ross Levinson, and I tried it. But I had no idea what I was doing. I knew about sports. I did not know about radio. They told me, hey, you're actually kind of funny. I said, okay, that's fine. I was in the throes, of almost every addiction I've suffered in my lifetime, drinking, drugging, gambling, the whole thing. I was, newly married. I had just relocated because of rehab. So I was a mess, basically. And it wasn't as if I thought about, hey, one day I'll be a radio star. The opportunity was there. It was better than making bread at L&N Seafood in Boca Town Center Mall. So I took it. And here's Tommy, a very talented guy. Here's Allison. She had produced in Philadelphia. And here's Scott Kaplan, a guy that had worked alongside Hank Goldberg, had some experience in Miami. And I followed the path. And then, listen, eventually this happens with lots of bands and teammates. You move on. You enjoy some success. We certainly did. Syndicated by two different companies, both Westwood One and Sports Fan Radio Network. Eventually graduated to a morning show in New York City. And then Scotty and I, unfortunately, started to drift apart. Relationship didn't change. There was some envy, I think, on both sides. I had my personal issues. And unfortunately, it fell apart. But, as I said, Scotty's like 15 feet away from me. I think I talk to Scott, 4 or 5 times a week now. I've got 2 kids. I'm in my 50s. He's got 5 kids. He's in his late 40s. And we're closer now than we ever were. But back then, man, 30 years ago, we had no idea. We went from, 2 kids doing internet radio to all of a sudden people like Joe Namath and Jerry Rice and Shaquille O'Neal and Tiger Woods paying attention to at the biggest sporting events of the year. So it was kind of surreal, and I had no idea what was going on.
Sid, it's interesting because you brought up the demons and the addictions you had to deal with.
What do you mean? What do you mean had to? I like when people say that you had to deal with. Let me just say this: I can't give you. I don't have 10 years sobriety. I don't have 10 years since I made a bet. I'm going to be 52 years old, and I am not that far removed. Listen, not where it was, where it ruled my life and destroyed me and ruined my career and cost me billions of dollars and all that. Thank God it hasn't been like that. But for me, it's still a fight every single day.
Yeah, you're right. It's an ongoing, lifelong recovery, and I misspoke there. You're right. That's exactly what it is. And you talk about those demons and the daily struggle of overcoming them. And it's interesting too, because I wonder sometimes if it wasn't also what fueled your amazing skill set, really. And I always would kid around with you. I remember when we would be in breaks and you'd say, hey, Tommy, should I say this? And I said, no, Sid, I don't think you should say that. And you'd say, and I said, we all have self-edit buttons and you have one, but I just wonder if you found it yet.
I don't know. I mean, that's funny. I don't know. I mean, look, I'm certainly not as crazy as I was 10 years ago on IMAX, or maybe as crazy as I was when I was partying with the People Tour with you, Scott, Dean, Sweeney, Allison, whatever, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm older. That's the bottom line. But, I'm still that guy that every morning on WABC in New York says stuff that people will say, I can't believe you said that. Like, are you allowed to say that on radio? I still get that all the time. So I still maintain that shock jock. I mean, look, I'm talking to President Trump. I talk to Bill O'Reilly every week, Chuck Todd every single week. So I've kind of given up the Eli Manning, Carmelo Anthony nonsense for that. I'm interviewing very serious people about very serious topics, but they still kind of look at me like that crazy. Iron Eagle says it best, the great announcer for CBS. We would often fill in together for Mike and the Mad Dog at WFAN. We're still very close. He's a guest on my show with Bernie every now and then. And Bernie will attest to this, too. He said the best part about working with Sid was you never knew if that was going to be your last day. and to an extent, or not nearly as much, that still holds true today. So I don't know if I have quote unquote, if I've found it yet, Tommy. I think I've tempered the act quite a bit in my personal life as well. But on any given day, you just don't know.
Getting back to what Tom asked you, it's curious to me, anybody who, goes through these things or is continually grappling with these things, always shadowing you, right? So, apart from support from your friends, family, coworkers, is there anything that was a continual inspiration, someone or something, something you read or saw that reminded you every day? No.
Just my kids. Let me say this. I was having dinner last night with Dan Marino and a bunch of people here in Atlanta. And somebody came to me and they said, we got an idea for you. You want, your morning show with Bernard is doing great. You talk about politics, news, sports, pop culture, entertainment. It's great. Your Sid Sports Sunday show, which is on Sunday mornings on WABC, is now the buzz in New York. It's strictly sports. It's great. But we want you to do a podcast. And the podcast we want you to do is the Comeback Sid. Cross out the K, put an S. And we want you to talk specifically on this podcast about how you went from having it all to having nothing to having it all. And we want you to talk to people, whether it's a Lawrence Taylor or a Michael Irvin. There's a million examples in sports. And by the way, a million examples in our everyday lives of people that had it, lost it, and somehow regained it, whether through recovery, whether through some group, a sponsor. I don't know what it is, but there's countless examples in all of our lives of people that have regained it, and that is the most inspirational story. And I said, let me tell you something. I love that idea. I love that idea because I'm friends with these guys. Now, a lot of these guys went through hell, lost wives and kids, spent time in jail, lost their careers, ridiculed in public for many, many years, and now they can smile again. And I would love to host that type of podcast. But for me, it was my kids, because in the end, guys, it really doesn't matter what the New York Post thinks about me. It really doesn't matter what the Miami Herald writes about me. But when I'm long gone, my son is going to talk about his dad, Sid, and my daughter Ava is going to talk about her dad, Sid. And if I can, at the very least, leave some type of positive impression on my children, where one day they won't be embarrassed to talk about their father, then all the stuff I've done in my life, all these, the shows and the money, it's garbage. So they are my inspiration. And by the way, with that said, I still drank and drugged plenty with both of them. I remember the days they were born. I said, this is it. I'm done. That's it. I still messed up time and time again. And I may mess up again. Who knows what could happen tonight? I don't think I will. I think I'm in a good space, but you never know. But if you have to ask me, what is the driving force that keeps me doing what I do every day? It's Ava and Gabriel.
What can you say? I mean, that's awesome. And I can honestly say, and I know it's sincere because I know you, and I know what you think, how you feel about your children. And I can honestly say too, and as an extension of that, and I'm real curious to know this. I've met your parents, I've met your siblings, and I can honestly say your love, your closeness with them is instantly apparent. How much did growing up in Brooklyn in the Rosenberg household affect what we hear in the Sid Rosenberg of today?
Well, I think it was positive and negative. I mean, I'm very close to my dad, Harvey, my mom, Naomi. You mentioned it, Tommy. I love my parents, but it was great. They were both very doting parents. I have three sisters. I really go by my baby sister, Elizabeth. She lives in Parkland, Florida. My two older sisters, much older, 15, 20 years old, were pretty much out of the house. Very close with them, but it was really me, Lizzie, and my parents. And a middle class, upper middle class Jewish family, both very doting parents. My dad was my Little League baseball coach, football coach, basketball coach. We went to Shea Stadium together. We watched TV together, and we still do. God bless him, 87 years old. But it was also one of these, they're Jewish people. I got my son, Sidney. He's a nice Jewish kid. He's going to be pre-med. He's going to Miami, and he's an asthmatic, so he's sick. So he's not really going to get himself into too much trouble. I wasn't a bad kid. I mean, I bought drugs, but I didn't break the law, never hurt anybody. But I was a troubled kid, and the signs were everywhere. I mean, it was right in your face, from leaving little baggies with cocaine residue to bottles that were empty in my bed of booze. And my parents, time and time again, denial, call it what you want, didn't do anything about it. So it was a catch-22. As a young boy, it was perfect. as I got older and started to delve into some of the bad things. They didn't know how to handle it, which didn't really help me. But in the end, I do believe that the love and the nurture that they provided back then and still do now, I think shaped me as the man and father I am today. They can't help the fact, whatever it is, that I got screwed up. It wasn't their parenting. I don't know what it was, but it happened. There's a very good parents, guys, that have very bad children. And there are very bad parents that luckily they have good children. I had my issues. But the love and nurture was instilled at an early age, and I do think that molded me into the man and father that I am today.
It's interesting. You talk about parenting. These days, I think coaching oftentimes is parenting by other means. And, I kind of wanted to ask you, I know you talk to a lot of coaches and managers, I read about how they have to alter their approach in order to reach and, essentially manage, teach, or even parent guys in their earlier mid-20s, in the business world. There's an issue of how to motivate and manage millennials, or as baby boomers, how we deal with millennials who are starting to become managers and we're answerable to them and so forth. So, any thoughts or stories to share about, how today's coaches and managers deal with today's quote unquote athlete?
Well, I think it's important. I think you've nailed it. I talked to Lawrence Taylor, and LT certainly had his issues, right? The drugs and all that stuff. But don't kid yourself. He was terrified of Bill Parcells. Bill was like his father. I recently asked Lawrence Taylor, I said, would you have ever knelt, before a football game? And he said, I'll do whatever coach tells me to do. Bill Parcells wants me to kneel, I'll kneel. I don't. So even then, even a guy like him who was a complete rebel and doing coke and getting into trouble, he was afraid of his coach.
Sid, we would love to do this again sometime. Thank you so much for your time. As always, entertaining, informative, and most of all, honest. Sid Rosenberg, WABC, New York.
Charles, it's good to talk to you again, buddy, and always liked your work. And Tommy, you're always going to be a brother to me. We may be far apart and a couple of pounds apart as well, but I'll always love you.
Wow.
No, listen, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be honest with you for a second, because now I've worked with Imus, I've worked with Howard Stern, I've worked with Mike Francesa, because I've worked with the biggest and the best, the baddest mother effers in the history of talk sports radio, all that stuff. And I'm going to tell you this, and I mean this. You're as talented a guy as anybody I've ever met, and a great guy, and I love you, and I wish you and Charles the best of luck.
Sid, thank you so much, and you have a great time on Radio Row.
Thank you, boys. See ya.
Sir.
You're listening to Work in Progress. My name is Tom Alexander, along with my partner, Charles Epstein. And Charles, wrapping up show 3.
Yeah, that was quite good, both interviews. By the way, for Ron's sake, I hope AI doesn't catch up to speedboating. That might undercut the excitement.
Yeah, hopefully not.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to go out there on the water knowing that every twist and turn is going to be guided by machine learning. I mean, I think part of the excitement is at any given moment you're going to wipe out and have some catastrophic accident. That keeps the pulse racing, I'm assuming.
I would think so, yeah.
And Sid, hey, what can you say? An amazing story from telemarketer to media row at the Super Bowl while keeping the demons at bay. And it was really sweet to hear him speak about his family, a nice glimpse behind the typical Sid bravado. And speaking as a lifelong Mets fan, I do appreciate the glimmer of hope vis-a-vis the Mets. So thank you very much, Sid, from your lips to Fred Wilpon's ears.
Well, as a Phillies fan, just not too much success, okay? This has been Work in Progress, brought to you by World at Work. Along with Charles Epstein, I'm Tom Alexander. Thanks for listening, everyone. So long.
This has been Work in Progress, a World at Work podcast about work, life, and everything in between, with award-winning radio host Tom Alexander and WorkSpan's Not Safe for Work columnist Charles Epstein. For more, visit worldatwork.org/workinprogress. That's worldatwork.org/workinprogress. facebook.com/workinprogress. Join us next week for another edition of Work in Progress.